Hello, everybody, and welcome to Church at Home with Rachel for Monday, the 25th of August. Back at the beginning, before the summer, right a couple days before our car accident, I was in Gimli for a clergy conference, and the speaker was talking about story and geography and the land and things like that. And the question of about she kept asking us questions about how has the land affected you. And then when I went to General Synod, I was very aware of people from across the country and the very ways that they speak, the accents of the people from Newfoundland or Nova Scotia, the way that people are from BC and Victoria, Vancouver Island, and the differences between the people of the prairies, the mountains, and the people of southwestern Ontario. The land we live on, the geography we inhabit, has a huge role to play in who we are. And having lived in Halifax in Nova Scotia, having lived in the Ottawa Valley for a while, if you've never been there, it is absolutely beautiful, beautiful land. Having lived in Niagara Falls, which is also southwestern Ontario, but very different than the Ottawa Valley. Having lived in Alberta, in Wainwright, in farm country, just a minute and a half, sort of, well, an hour, a couple of hours from the mountains. Having been up in the mountains, been up a mountain, and having lived by the ocean in Halifax, all of these things, I've had a pretty amazing run at discovering the different ways that the geography in which I live impacts me. And that's the question I want to ask you today comes from that conference in Gimli. I wrote it on a post-it note while I was there. It says, how does my geography affect my story? So first of all, what is your story? What is your story? I have discovered that my story changes the older I get, the more places I've lived, the more experiences I have. When I was a little girl, up until my teenage years, until I was about 17 or 18, I would have talked about my story, and almost every time I talked about my story, I would talk about going home, going up home to the farm. You see, and I didn't even realize it until I was later years. And in particular, this past June, as Kirsten was talking to us about the story we have because of our geography, the land, I didn't realize that for the formative part of my early days, in my childhood and my teenage years, I was absolutely informed and formed by the land. And for me, it was the farm. It didn't matter where we lived. We moved around a lot. My dad was a bank manager, so we moved every couple of years. And one thing didn't matter where our physical bodies were, where our bedrooms furniture were, it was where my books resided on their shelves. My home was always the farm, up home. And I think it was always north of where we lived, if I remember correctly. So it would indeed be up home in the north, not too far away. But just that whole being. I remember the drive, whether we were going from, St. Thomas, which was a good 3+ hours to get to the farm, or even from Listowel, which is only 45 minutes from the farm. There was a certain point in the drive where all of a sudden, even as young as I can remember, I would begin to relax and feel like I was home. And it wasn't just the signs I was seeing, the houses that looked familiar, but it was the change in the trees, the hills, the fields. There was something about the essence of the geography that was like drawing me like a magnet back to the farm. I was coming home to where my grandparents were, to where my best memories of Christmases and Easters and summer holidays and Thanksgivings were. It was the place I felt the most me. And the land itself created that for me. And amazingly enough, the few times that I actually get to go back up there, my grandparents are gone. The farm has long been sold. Some of my relatives still live up there, but I don't really have a place there that's mine to go to. So the odd time that I do get up there, it is incredible what happens to me. I still get drawn in by the geography. I still feel like I'm going home. I feel a little homeless when I'm up there because I have no place to land. But I feel like I am going home, and that is incredible. I also have discovered that my assumptions about my geography are not always correct. I remember when I was probably 13 or 14, I was in a poetry writing phase, and I wrote this poem about the mountains and how strong they were, and how powerful they were, they drawing me to the mountains, and how much I despised the sea. It was wild, and it was horrible, and it's a place that made me feel afraid. And I'd never been to, I think I'd been to the mountains once on a trip, but I'd never been to the ocean yet. But at that time, at least not that kind of ocean. Been to Florida, but not the same thing. And I remember I was so proud of that poem. And then I lived in Halifax, and I discovered a place called the Look Off. And the boys, my stepsons, called it the rocks of Mount Doom. I think that's from the Lord of the Rings or something. And it was a place just still within the HRM, the Halifax Regional Municipality, but it was out past, past Spryfield, out past there, and you come around a curve, and there's no trees, there's no houses, and there's just a pull off where you can park, and then there's all these rocks, and there's the ocean heading toward the northwest arm into Halifax. And you could sometimes see some ships out in the water. You could often see smaller boats out in the water. And it was always rocky and rough, and it looked so uninhabitable. It was looked so, but there was something about that water that made me feel calm. The coming and going. It would go out and it would come crashing back in, and then it would go back out. And it was hypnotic, and it was beautiful. And part of the beauty of that particular space, and what I was so surprised, because I'd assumed I would hate living near the ocean, this vast expanse that, you know, I don't like I don't like bridges because I don't like the water underneath them. So I probably thought the ocean would just be this vast, horrible, soul-sucking thing. And I discovered that it wasn't. And part of that, I think, is because Rob spent so much time on the sea. He was away when we lived in Halifax. We were there for 7 years. He was gone for about half that time, sailing and doing other things, workups, things like that. And while he was gone, I had to trust that the ocean would treat him well. And he fell in love with the ocean. He would be there now if he could. And I came to have a grudging respect for her, the water, referred to as her. And there was something that it maybe it was because of Rob, I don't know, but it pulled my heart, and it made my heart swell, and I loved it. And then we moved, after Halifax, we moved to Ottawa Valley, where we were in some beautiful old mountains, Laurentians, where literally you could, at night, I could drive my stepson at night into Petawawa. We were 40 minutes out of Petawawa. He worked nights at McDonald's, and he didn't have a driver's license. So I'd drive him in at night. And on foggy nights, there might be a full moon, and the sky would be blue with some clouds. And you come down come down from the top. It was the Laurentians. It is a mountain. It doesn't look like a mountain compared to the west, but come down the top of that mountain, and you could see below it the fog, and you could drive into the fog, and then get down underneath the fog and you could see the eyes of animals in the ditches and in the trees. You could sometimes they would dart out across the road in front of you. You have to be careful. Not very often did we see other cars coming at us at that time of night on that road. And then you go through the valley, come back up. You drive back right into that ribbon of fog, and then come back out above it, and the beautiful night sky, the glorious moon, the stars twinkling, and that deep velvet blue. This kind of blue, I don't know if you can tell, but this kind of blue, um, as you pulled back up. And I thought, oh, the mountains are beautiful. How incredible is it that I have this geography that I love now, the water, and I have these mountains. Well, then we moved to Wainwright, and we went to Alberta, and that's where Wainwright is. And one of our holidays in the summer, stinking hot, middle of COVID, have to wear masks everywhere, and we went to Banff. And I don't know about you, but lots of people love Banff. I do not love Banff. Too many people, just crowded. It was stinking hot. The hotel we were in was meant for people who ski, so they didn't have air conditioning, and it was about 36 degrees. It was just the middle of a heat wave, and they gave us one little fan. It wasn't pleasant. Um, but I remember standing right in the middle of Banff, and they had lots of places for people with bikes, and they had like little fountains for dogs to have water. It was great. Took good care of the tourists. But I remember looking up, and right there ahead of me was a mountain, and all around me, I was right in the bottom, and I remember feeling claustrophobic. And then thinking about that poem I wrote about how much I would love the mountains. I have come to believe that I love the Laurentians and I love the foothills, But to be within the mountains, I felt contained. I felt like I couldn't get out. And I realized that that's a part of my story. I'm not claustrophobic, but I have never liked feeling contained. I've never liked feeling like there's locked doors around me or places I can't get out of. And that sense of understanding how geography affects my story was incredible for me at that moment when I realized, after having lived at the ocean and falling in love with her, and living in the Laurentians, they were a boon to my soul. They were so beautiful, such a gorgeous place. I would go back to the Ottawa Valley in a heartbeat. And then to be there where I thought would be the greatest place in my life, I realized that my story was stifled. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I felt like I couldn't be free. I couldn't roam. I couldn't be the person I was called to be as one who travels and gets around and gets in the car and drives. I felt like I was being suffocated. And I realized in that moment, and when Kirsten talked about the land and the geography as part of our story, I realized how right she was. Because the very places we are affect how we live and how we think and how we breathe and how we play and how we pray. And some places are good for us and other places aren't. And I love the mountains from afar. I love the stories they tell and the adventures they bring. But being in the middle of them is not where I need to be, at least not the newer mountains, the ones that aren't worn down yet. I like the ocean with the erosion that happens, with the coming and going, and knowing that every time that wave breaks on that rock, a little bit of that rock is affected and smoothed. The giving and taking of what that water does, what the rock does to the water, maintaining it, holding it in, keeping it from going someplace else. The mountains, the Laurentians, that were so gentle and worn and carried the animals and the possibilities of being on top of the mountain and in the bottom of the valley and right back up within a few seconds' time. The geography of the farm, the golden fields of wheat, the hills, the cows, the rivers, the creeks or the cricks, depending on where you're from. All of these things speak to us in ways that we may or may not pay attention to. But I would really like to encourage you to pay attention to them. Pay attention to the geography that you inhabit or the geography you used to, and think about how has that geography affected your story. Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear, or email me. I would love to hear how your geography or geographies have affected, changed, incorporated into your story of who you are and who you are becoming. Have a great day. God bless you. I hope you have a great week. I will see you again tomorrow for Church at Home with Rachel.